When the smell got up his nose and down his throat, he was starting to think that maybe the only way out was to start a fire. But whatever had to be done quickly before someone got hurt. Every part of him prayed that the police wouldn't show up. Tom Markhams wanted something very different than everyone else he knew, who all wanted the 3-bedroom luxury condo in a gated community. He had always wanted to live in the country where it was quieter. So when he saw that a cozy cottage in Ohio was for sale at a great price, he just couldn't say no. But there was something about the house that he just couldn't figure out. The log cabin was on a huge 30-acre piece of land, and it had its own apple orchard and water source. Tony could make the cabin into a paradise in the woods, but it would take some work. But he couldn't get rid of the feeling that everything was too good to be true. Why did it cost so little? Tony did some research and found out that the previous owner of the house had recently lost his wife and wanted to sell the house as soon as possible so he could move to Florida and retire. But Tony wasn't going to stop there. First, he had to make sure that the old building was still in good shape. In the middle of the kitchen floor, there was a strange doorway. But that wasn't even the first thing Tony found. For some strange reason, dozens of thick nails were used to close the trapdoor in the kitchen. Even stranger, it had some kind of industrial-strength glue holding it shut. Tony called a repairman to come look, and even he didn't know what was wrong. They finally got it open after a lot of swearing and heaving. Then they started to smell it. The smell that came from behind the door made them jump back and gagged. No matter what it was, it made Tony want to throw up on the floor. What could be down there that made it smell so bad? It smelled like, no. It's not possible. Tony couldn't help but think about the wife of the old owner, who had just died. Tony and the repairman put their heads and flashlights carefully into the hole in the floor. Tony heard a loud gasp at that moment. The repairman for Tony's car grabbed him by the collar and pushed him back. The man yelled, "Get out of there." With a white face. Tony looked in and held his breath as he saw 2 legs. 6 more of them came out. Spiders. But they weren't just any spiders, they were poisonous funnel weavers. Just below the hole, there was a huge nest full of them. Tony knew they could bite and hurt people, so he and the repairman started stomping on whatever was trying to get out and slammed the trapdoor shut. This was just the start of their nightmare, though. Even after they got rid of the nest and it was safe to look inside again, there was still the problem of the awful smell. They carefully climbed up the rusty, falling apart ladder to get to the secret room under the cottage. The answer was there, in the corner. It was leaking. Long, reddish-brown tendrils grew along a cement enclosure that looked like a cistern or a rock bathtub. Inside, the gooey mixture was smooth and shiny, and it had a strange rainbow sheen. Tony had to do everything he could to stay healthy. It was terrible. Then he saw something sticking up from the mixture of nightmares. Was a bone. He let out a sigh. He said, "Stupid raccoons." Tony, on the other hand, was finally able to take it easy. Even though it was the smelliest thing he had ever smelled, he didn't have to call the police. But why did they hide the room? He had never seen anything like it before. As they cleaned up the nasty mess, the 2 men talked about their ideas. Maybe it was an old room for storing things? Maybe a bunker or a place to clean the animals you hunt? Even stranger was a small hole in the wall that was full of ash and moldy wood. But there wasn't a chimney or any other way for the smoke to go. Then they found something even more strange. Back up in the house, the handyman noticed that the house had a huge A-frame that was higher on one side of the roof, but the low-ceilinged rooms inside didn't make room for all that extra space. He looked at the ceiling because he thought there must be some kind of storage space up there. Eventually, he found a trap door. With a light pull on a small metal ring, an old ladder fell out, sending pink insulation and dust everywhere. And when he and Tony looked inside, they couldn't understand what they saw. About halfway down the attic, there was a wall with a door that seemed to be out of place among the fiberglass insulation. But what was even stranger was that there was a roof, but the attic covered it completely. Tony's heart could no longer handle it. What other weird things might they find in his house? Up in the attic, there was no electricity, so Tony had to use only his flashlight once more. They carefully put their feet on the floor, which smelled like dust from decades ago. Tony's hair started to stand up on the back of his neck, and the heat and darkness covered him like a cloak. What he had found was like something from a scary movie. Why hadn't the last person who owned the house told him any of this? Who used to live here? To find out, they took one shaky step after another. Tony's mind kept going back to another question. Who still lived here? When he gently kicked the door open with his foot, he saw something in the light of his flashlight that he will never forget. Wallpaper in old colors like pea green and pastel pink was coming off the walls in a scary way, as if the attic apartment were shedding its skin. With every step, smells of mold, dust, and rat nests came up from the floor. They pulled their t-shirts over their faces. They had to be careful not to breathe in pieces of insulation or mold spores, which could be dangerous. Tony and the handyman found out that the strange apartment, which was all by itself, had 3 rooms. The only piece of furniture that stayed was an old cabinet. Other things, like an old hat and a tire that had been left to rot for who knows how long, showed that these rooms had been used as living quarters. Also, there was a bathroom. In the bathroom, there was a toilet and a sink. It looked like it was connected to the main water and waste lines of the main house. But why did his house have a scary house in it? Tony decided to go to Reddit again because he had more questions than answers. But some of the answers didn't make him feel much better about what he had found. People on Reddit who saw the photos were right to be scared. House on the market. Price cut because there's a big nope in the attic, one joked. I didn't want to be the first to say this, another user wrote, but it reminds me of scary stories where people keep family members locked up. Another user who paid attention had a theory. Why does this keep happening? I looked at all of his pictures, and it looks like the floor is covered in insulation, he wrote. So does that mean that all of the insulation you see is just the insulation sitting on top of his ceiling? Did Op climb up on the rafters to get around? It does look like a roof, and an addition were added. It's almost as if they built a roof and walls around the first house, and then decided to keep going and make it bigger. But Tony needed answers that were more clear. Tony even asked the former owner about the basement and the attic. But all he said was, they've been there forever. The weird rooms were more than annoying. But he hoped that someone on the internet could help him figure it out. There were a lot of answers, but they were more fun to read than helpful. The subspace under the house was officially called the Hell Room, and Tony promised to keep everyone up to date on his plans to turn it into something useful. A cold room to store vegetables for the winter seemed like the best choice. But he had to do one thing first before he could put even one potato down there. He also bought bleach and other cleaning supplies and sprayed the whole room with a spray that kills spiders. He had to get rid of the sticky layer of rotting roots and years of wet rust before he could put food down there. What about the fact that the whole house is in the attic? A few Reddit users suggested that Tony turn the space into a place where he could live, like his own speakeasy, which would make it less creepy. Repairing would be fun. Tony wrote on Reddit, I'd have to check to see if the walls are moldy, and I'm sure the plumbing and wiring need to be redone.